Welcome to our second webinar in the Drupal migration webinar series. I am Dustin LeBlanc. I am one of the developers, project managers, and general stuff doers here at Tandem, and also a maintainer for Lando. John, go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody.
I'm John Ouellet. I'm a senior software engineer here with Tandem, and I'll be doing the presentation.
Awesome. So the format we used for the last webinar worked out pretty well. So I think we're going to follow, essentially the same format here. So Zoom has a question and answer Q&A system built into it. If you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in there, and I'll either try while John's talking. If it's if it's something I can answer real quick, I'll just throw an answer back to you in the chat. Some of them we'll save for John to answer live. And usually we just have him review some of the questions that I answered during that time as well. If you want to chat with people, go ahead and chat in the chat system as well. That's available for anything that isn't like a question that you want us to handle. So without further ado, let's get started. John, take it away.
All right. Oh, I should remember to share my screen this time.
Going pro right from the get-go.
Yeah. All right. How do you hide this window? Anywho.
You got to use that second monitor.
Yeah. All right. Again, I'm John Ouellet. I'm the senior software engineer here. We are makers of Lando here at Tandem. But, we do Drupal, WordPress, Laravel, Vue.js. The side tidbit, I'm also enamored with celebrity gossip drums and dank memes. All right. So what you'll learn in this webinar, in the second webinar, we're going to be doing a deeper dive into all the things that actually make migrations do their magic. I'll be going over source plugins, preparing the row and when to extend them. Quick overview of destination tables and plug. Can you boot him, Dustin? The guy with the Russian name. Quick overview of destination plugins and the table destination plugin. Deep dive into the process plugins, and then the commonly requested data transformations that a lot of people typically ask. The source ones will be quick. The destination will be really, really quick. Where most of the magic happens with any migration is typically in the process plugins. But let's get into this. And again, the demo repo is located on our GitHub at the migration webinar. And after this webinar, I'll push all the code I have locally up. Actually, I think most of it's up there now. All right, so let's dive into this. So we're going to start with the source plugins. And with all the sections I'm going to go over, I'm going to give a quick overview and then go into the code and actually reiterate everything and show with examples. So the source plugin is obviously where the stuff you're getting, your data you're getting from on either your Drupal 6 or 7 or even another type of database. But for the sake of this webinar, we're doing a Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. So this is where everything is defined from our nodes, taxonomies, fields, whatever you're trying to get. This is the part that prepares the data for you. So when you get this data, it comes like pre-cooked. Here's your data as it existed in the Drupal 7 site, and there you go. And so there's one of the things that you will do is use either the prepare row if you extend the source class, or use this hook, the hook migrate prepare row. And I'm going to go over that in a minute. Just as a side note, not that it matters now, that the hook will be deprecated in Drupal 10 because everything is moving towards event subscribers, but I'm still going to show you it because Drupal 10 is a long ways away. And then finally, with the source plugins, you also define your constants, which is just a static value that you can inject during the processing of your migration. Now, the source plugin class, usually you don't extend or tweak it in a majority of migrations. There are exceptions to the rule. If you're doing a custom entity migration or something on the entity is breaking the migration, which I'll go over some examples. The biggest culprit I've seen after doing over 30 migrations that someone enabled multilingual and gave up, and like the language part of the stuff or the data is all messed up, and you just got to get around it, and I'll show you how. And finally, if you really want to always extend the source plugin, you can, and then you do all your prepare row work in it, but you know, that creates a lot of source classes when you can just use the hook, and it's much easier. All right, so let me go ahead and dive into here. All right, so with any source plugin, everything is defined up here in the source. You have your plugin name, which in this case is the Drupal 7 node plugin. Your node type, which is specific for this source plugin. A lot of different source plugins will have different configuration that you can use to do whatever, define like a node type or some bundle or some extra configuration, et cetera, et cetera. And then this is the constants that I talked about that I could define later on if I wanted to use it via doing constant/sub. But all right, so with anything, the easiest way to kind of look at your source plugin is if you're in your IDE, you can always find stuff like this: IDE space equals space, then the plugin name is the quickest and easiest way to find the stuff in any annotation. And this kind of goes across the board for anything in Drupal 8 with the annotations. So we'll pop into here. And this is the Drupal 7 node source that comes from the node module and core. And you can kind of look over this, but basically what's going on is we're querying the database to grab our typical fields. And then here's the prepare row that extends from the SQL base. And we're slapping in all the fields for that node and then throwing them out there to the universe. So that's a quick overview. You know, you can play around with this one if you want, but generally you won't really ever mess with this with a couple of edge cases. And this goes the same for anything else that has a source, from taxonomy to anything else. You can come and pop in and look at if you ever have a weird case going on, and you can kind of tweak it and go from there. But for the sake of anything, we're just gonna you know, keep trucking ahead. So as I mentioned, this prepare row is the same as is what calls this hook migration prepare row. And that's actually called way up the food chain on this. If we go up here, Drupal SQL base to SQL base, I believe it's actually called in the source plugin base, which is all the way down here. So I remember last time someone asked if you couldn't be able to call this for some reason, but it would be impossible because all sources derive from that SQL source base, which gives you an opportunity to hook into and massage your data. Now, you don't necessarily have to do this. You could use a process plugin for some of the stuff, but sometimes it's easier to alter the data as it comes across in the source, then process it some more. And we'll kind of look, if you look over here, this is the hook migrate prepare row hook that I do all the stuff with. If you look at the migration boilerplate code, it has a whole bunch of instances where I've already set up that I've run across where if you want to skip a certain type, if you need to massage any type of data, do any kind of funky stuff, like I have here, if you want to move a field to a different node type during the migration, or change the content type name, which is pretty common. And it kind of has all these different instances. And then there's some stuff where this is pretty useful if you're migrating from Drupal 6 or 7. It has legacy field formatters that you can automatically convert over. So in this case, it's easier to do it in the source when then the data, you can just use the get plugin on the process side. But again, this is very powerful, but I'm just gonna kind of show you a couple of tips and tricks here. So with anything, we'll fire up my debugger. Now you have 3 classes that you can work with. You have the row, which is where you do a chunk of your work, or where everything comes from, your source, your destination, the process plugins and everything. Then you have the class itself, which is all the information about the migration that's currently running. Typically, you won't really touch this too much unless you're just trying to get like the ID or anything like that. And the source comes in handy if you need to check the database. You can query the original database with this if you wanted to, massage some data some more. But in general, everything you need to know within the source side of preparing the data will occur in the row. And with the row plugin, row class, there are a few methods that you will use all the time, which is get source property and set source property. You can look at all the sources you want by kind of just using the catch-all right here. And I'm just going to show you what it populates as. So it's every field that exists in the source that came from the node source class that I showed you earlier, with all the datas and as it existed on the Drupal 7 site. So technically, if you have a very simple site or you just need to do a little bit more data massaging, you can handle it here. But other than that, you know, the bulk of your data transformation will happen in process plugins. Is there any questions on this part so far? I know I kind of went over it quickly.
So far, John, we don't have any questions from anybody, but okay. If you guys do have any, feel free to pop them in the question and answer section. We've also talked about a couple different things in the chat. I made sure to give everybody a link to the migration webinar, you know, the repo that we have, so that they could see it, and gave people links to the existing video. So chat, if you're looking for that information, it is in the chat. Ryan actually just asked a question. Are going to talk about using Drush to facilitate the migration?
That's what I was doing. Yeah.
Yeah. John is using Drush commands to do that, and he did cover that as an overview topic in the first video. If you want to go back and watch that too.
Yeah. Yeah. If you all missed the first one, I went over all the setup and using Drush and everything like that. So watch that video after this one. All right. So I'm just going to go in and I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple of typical examples that I've run across where you would actually extend and change the source plugin setup for nodes. And these come from use cases that I've run across over time. And these will all be in the migration boilerplate as well. So this is the one where I had to remove the language from the node migration, which exists right down here. So if you look here, there is no language set up, because in the get field values, you can pass, you can remove it or pass a null value, and this will prevent, it's a really weird error saying like it couldn't match it couldn't set the data for some reason, and things like that. So again, all I did is I took, I literally copy pasted the node migration one because I didn't want it to set the data already. And then I changed the ID up here to a node language. And then all I would do in turn would be to take this and put that there as my source plugin, run CIM again to import everything, and then rerun the migration, and hopefully all will be well. And that's generally how this whole workflow will go. Would be set your own, ID, reset it in the YAML, rinse and repeat 42,000 times. And again, this is the most common use case. I probably run into this probably like 3 times. But another interesting one was again, I copy pasted the node plugin through it in here, and we had this interesting case where we were merging 3 node types into 1 node type, and I could have had 3 separate YAMLs with the destination plugin as the destination node, but instead I decided just to extend this, and now you can pass in the node type as an array. Kind of a nifty little use case, and I have a little example here where I'm able to pass in 3 different node types. Then we can do all our processing on 1 YAML, which makes it a little bit easier, I guess. But there's always 2 ways to skin a cat, which is a weird saying. But I also wanted to go over custom entity migration as well, or table migration. There is the only exception to like using the typical Drupal stuff is if you're coming from a different database, like a WordPress database or Joomla or just whatever, you know, and you need to set this up so that you have, you know, your data is basically coming from the table into, you know, your Drupal 8 site. And there's a couple different ways to do that. I mean, the source part of that is the same, and then we'll go over the destination part in the next section. But so for the sake of quickness, I went ahead on the Drupal 7 site. I went through and I created a quick little custom schema called Supertrill. And I just filled it with useless data, and it's a really simple data structure. It has, you know, an index, a blob field or a long text field, and a timestamp. We need to figure out how do we get that over, you know, to Drupal 8, and it's pretty easy. So what we'll do is we will go ahead. I have a plugin here called the Supertrill table, and you'll notice this directly extends the SQL base class. And the reason for this is I don't really need any frills. This is a straight table to table migration. You could use the Drupal SQL base class if you wanted some of the extra fun stuff that comes with that, but for our use case, we don't need to. So to set up a very simple table to table migration, we have the query part, which is just querying and getting all our fields with the typical, you know, DB select type of thing. We're setting up the fields, and then this is the index, and that's it. So if you have like a simple database table that you need to move, this is really quick and easy to do. And basically what will happen is if we come over to over here, now once we have that all set up, I'll go ahead and actually, I should bring up the config as well. So here's the table migration. Again, here's the source part of it. I'm just using my plugin, Supertrill, which is I designed up here as a migrate source in the annotation. So when I run migrate status, we'll go up here and you'll see that there are 25 entries in the Supertrill table that have yet to be moved. So good, it worked. It knows because if I come over here and I do this, there's 25 rows. So everybody wins. And again, you can see it's just junk data that I posted in there. So again, very powerful, very easy to use. Most of the time, you won't ever do stuff like this, but I'm just showing you because I said I would do a deep dive. Most of the time, you're just doing some really simple stuff like taking the existing node one and tweaking it to your use case. And you can even do stuff like extend it. Like this was a case where we had to run all the nodes in backwards order from the latest to the oldest, and because there was duplicates and they wanted to retain the copy of the latest node. And in order to do that, I had to change the order by. So you could do something simple like this. Just anything else, you know, typical type of stuff where you just extend the, you know, the class you want to, do what you need to, and return the data. So really powerful system, pretty quick and easy to use. Again, you won't do this heavy tweakage. I'm just showing you because I said I would. All right, before I move on to the destination plugins, are there any more questions?
We got a question from Ryan. He was saying, that's good for a simple table transfer. Are we able to illustrate throwing in a bridge table with that? And so I'm assuming we're talking, when Ryan says bridge table, I assume we're talking about like a polymorphic relationship kind of thing.
Are you talking about like a join or?
Yeah, that's what I'm guessing. Yeah, maybe it'd be something like, yeah, if, for instance, you have two tables that have a joining pivot table between them. I think that's the other.
You would just alter the query here to do whatever you want, if that's what he's getting at.
Yeah, I mean, you've also mentioned process plugins, and if you need to do something that you can't really think through in SQL, and you actually want to,
Well,
be
well,
performing some.
you don't want
Go
to
ahead.
do this part in the process plugin.
Got it.
You would do all your SQL joins in the source part. So I don't really know what a bridge table is, but if you're talking about joins, then you would just do it. It's just like any other, DB connection stuff where you would just throw a bunch of joins together and get your data that you need. And
Yeah,
there's
he clarified that he was talking about essentially pivot tables. So, when you have, for instance, like you have two objects like a user and a group, like, and then you have a table that joins user group memberships, like that kind of thing.
yeah, just use joins.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Any other questions?
Nope, that's it for now.
All right. All right. So I'm going to skip ahead to destination plugins because this is really quick and simple before we get into process plugins. So the destination plugins are the entity which, where everything goes. You can use this to, you can use the Drupal console command, Drupal DE, to list out all your content entities. And that's what 99% of the time, all your destinations will go to. Will be a node, taxonomy, or anything that the module has, designed for you. The likelihood you'll ever tweak a destination plugin is non-existent. I did one use case when we helped at the University of San Francisco do an organic groups to groups migration, and I had to tweak it to stop it from saving before I had to do some other magic. In hindsight, now that I know more, I could probably use an event subscriber to do that. But the only exception to really this rule is the table destination, which I'm about to show you. That comes from the Migrate Plus module. And again, this will coincide with the example I just did. But generally, everything has that, at least if you're doing Drupal to Drupal migrations, almost everything is defined now. There was a time when, not every module had a migration path and you had to use the table destination or write your own custom entity type of stuff. And it's much better now. So I'm just going to go over I'm going to show you a couple commands real quick and go over the table one. So if we come over here and we run Drupal DE, so here's all my content-based plugins, and that's it. Your content will go to any one of these unless it's a straight table-to-table migration. And I'll show you right now that it looks like, down at the bottom, everything looks like this: entity-node, or the entity bundle, or the entity type in the front, and then the entity bundle afterwards. And that's it. That's rinse and repeat. That's pretty much the process for everything. And some of them have some extra keys like default bundle, which would be where the destination node type we're moving to in this use case. Pretty straightforward, simple to use. You don't really need to know too much else beyond that. With the exception of this. So this is the destination table plugin that comes with Migrate Plus. Pretty straightforward-ish. The documentation on this is still in an issue, and it was kind of interesting to kind of dig through and figure this out. But so how it works is within this plugin, it identifies keys where you have your table name, your ID fields, which are your primary keys, and then the fields themselves that are getting mapped. On this side is the Drupal 7 value, and this is the Drupal 8 destination field. Pretty straightforward. There's a couple little extra magics with it, and if you go into the Migrate Plus issue queue and search for the table documentation, they go over like one or up two other things where like you can set like auto increment and other things like that. But in general, this is how you do a table migration. And once I come back over here, so that's it. So they've been created. Go ahead and drop down in here. The table is actually called and voila. Our data is exactly the same as we switch between tabs. So Pretty simple, straightforward, easy to use. Every once in a blue moon, you'll have to do something like this, but the likelihood is almost non-existent. All right, so now before I get into the really heavy part, is there any more questions?
None currently.
All right. Am I going too fast?
Let's see, we got about 35 minutes left. But yeah, if anybody does have any questions, if there's anything John's gone over too quickly, let us know, and we can go back and review any concepts in further detail.
Oh, Jared has raised his hand.
Jared, let us know if there's anything we can help you with.
All right, I'm going to truck ahead though.
I've noticed that many of us accidentally press the raise hand button. So, yep, looks like that was the case.
All
Go
right.
ahead, John.
All right. So this is where the bulk of everything happens. I kind of quickly went over source and destination plugins because they're really not all that important in the grand scheme of things. You can do a few things, do some stuff in your, that prepare row hook to massage your data, but this is where all the magic happens. So this is, like I said, this is where you transform your data in a repeatable way through process plugins. And the majority of the transformations, you'll put them in your YAML config and you can chain them together. You can do really powerful stuff with this where you almost have to, in a lot of cases, you only ever have to write code anymore. The migration system is really, has come a long way as compared to like when Drupal 8 first came out. It's gotten to the point now where I'm doing migrations and unless it's a really weird use case, I can straight up just use process plugins and chain them and do all sorts of cool stuff with no PHP at all. However, if you needed to, it's really easy to create your own or extend or copy process plugins and do your own thing. And like I said, this is the bulk of the work of your migration, just getting the data. Because the data in Drupal 7 does not go into Drupal 8 easily because the whole structure of everything has changed, as everybody knows. There is some stuff, but in general, you need to do a lot of massaging. These slides will be available afterwards, but these are the bookmarks, or bookmark these are the core and migrate plus process plugins. Very handy reference. Even after doing this for a few years and many, doing many migrations, I still come back and reference these all the time. All right. So I'm just going to go over these real quick, and then I'm going to go back into the code and I'm going to kind of show you the ins and outs of each of these commonly core process plugins. The first three are probably you'll use 95% of the time in your migration. You have your get plugin, which just gets the stuff. And you can either, with this plugin, it's a little bit different than others. You can call one-to-one, key to value type of YAML setup in it, and it knows to use the get plugin. The sub process is a very powerful one. It basically allows us to iterate over an array of data and then use another process plugin within that. You use this a lot with paragraphs, reference fields, dates, body fields, like anything that has that data, that wonderful data structure in Drupal where it's value, 0, value, and you need to transform that data into something else or grab that data and reuse it. This used to be called the iterator plugin. In some documentation, you'll still see that in some older setups. It's the same thing that's been deprecated and will go away in Drupal 9, I believe. The other one most common is static map. This is basically what it says is just taking, mapping a key and value pair based on the value. You use this a lot when you're mapping the body fields because the filter formats usually aren't named the same. Or if you have like select fields where you change the key value between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, very common as well. And finally, the other one that's used a lot is format date and does exactly what you think it does. It formats the date from one date format to another. Some other core plugins that I typically use is your migration lookup. This is how you can tap into another migration and grab the resulting ID. This is used a lot with paragraph and reference migrations. Skip on empty, this is a very useful one. It does exactly what it says. It skips the row if you have an empty value. You can also skip the process as well, but I haven't used that too much. Default value is another good one. If there is no value, you can assign it a value just so that your data gets over, or you knew that fields were empty or null on the old site, and this way everything will be the same on the new site. And then finally, an older one that I don't use too much anymore, with the exception of like single paragraph to paragraph, is extract. And this grabs the data from an array where you specified the key of that array, and it returns that data. All right, so I'm going to kind of go through these real quick. So again, a real easy way to find everything is just to look up the plugin name. As I mentioned, the plugin get is used a lot, but like I mentioned, you can also do this if you wanted to, and it's the same thing. It's just like the short form of it. That's the way it was for a long time, and all of a sudden, like a year ago, they started pushing out the used actual plugin, so everything kind of looks the same. The sub-process one is the most interesting one of them all, because here we go. Here's the body field that I'm taking from the Drupal 7 site, and I'm pushing it over. And how it works is you define the plugin, you name your source, which in our case is the body field, and then from here, the array keys are split out, and then you can map them one-to-one, or you can run more process plugins on that specific value on the destination, because this is the Drupal 8 site it's going to, and this is the source value over here. So in this case, and this is I've rinsed and repeated using this a bazillion times now, we're splitting up the value of the body, and then we're also mapping. This is the static map one. We're mapping it to the proper Drupal 8 keys on this side, since they're different. But yeah. Well, actually, I said it backwards. This is the Drupal 7. This is the Drupal 8 side. Or maybe I have it backwards. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. So to find a process plugin is the same as the other side. You just kind of do ID equals sub-process, and you can kind of look. All of them have pretty good documentation as to what they can and cannot do. And if you have any questions, just come here and look at it, and it tells you the available configuration keys, what it can and cannot do, et cetera, et cetera. And in this case, it's pretty straightforward stuff, but there's some other things on here, like you can assign a different key, what to use. I've never really used that. But again, what this process plugin does is it takes your value, and it'll either, if you're just using the get plugin, it'll just go ahead and pass the data, but it also is able to create a new row and then process that data. So you can do a lot of cool stuff with this. It's used so much, it's crazy. But yeah, and just look at the the documentation of any of these process plugins, and it gives you a really good overflow of what you can and cannot do with them. All right. Some of the other type of plugins, just quick examples of them. So, oops, there we go. Here's the format date one. Typically, when you get a date, it always comes across, in an array. So you'll run it through the sub process, and then you'll go ahead and use this plugin. This is a great plugin too, because you can do a lot of cool stuff with this. But again, it has a few extra things. You can also set up the there's a few different keys, like you can set the time zones from a time zone to a different time zone. It has a whole bunch of different settings that you can mess around with, but well, not a whole bunch, a couple extra ones I did list, but very powerful. I've had to use the time zone stuff when someone just messed with the time zone, and it's come in handy, especially if your times and dates come across wrong. The migration lookup is the other one. Actually, put the old one here. I need to fix this, but there was the old one, which was just called migration. And it's actually called migration lookup now, and has been for the past year. But so basically, this is a paragraph migration. And what we're doing is we're using the migration lookup. We're grabbing the migration that we actually set up, and we're using our source ID as the record of truth. And then it spits it out, and then we're chaining it, and we're extracting this to grab, which because the value will come across as value with an array of 0. And we want to grab that and set that to the target ID right here. And this is a little bit different format. You can actually call the array field, and I'm sure if you've done migrations, you've seen them. Instead of doing the sub process, you can use the slash and call the destination property itself. And this is the easier way to do it when you have a one-to-one paragraph migration instead of using sub process. But we'll go over that in a minute too. And then finally, the skip on empty one. Again, common if you have an empty value and you don't want it to process the row, you can actually skip the process, which just skips the current process and keeps going down the chain. But usually a lot of times when I use skip on empty, it's because something is wrong, like people who like dynamically generate nodes and there's an empty title, and it just makes Drupal really angry when you do that, and things like that. Pretty easy and simple to use. And finally, the default value one is, you'll see it on every node type one for the language code. It's basically signing the undefined language if there is no language set on the Drupal 8 side, if it's coming across as null, which we actually did in the case of where I am tweaking the language stuff. But again, those ones are the ones that I use all the time. You just play around with them. You can put debug points in here to kind of mess around with the data and see what you're doing through the console, like I did before. If you really wanted to kind of see how things are going. If things aren't going wrong, it's a really easy and quick way to do things. Just to throw a debug point in here, run your migration. Oh, that's why, because the data isn't correct, and that's when you would use like prepare row to kind of massage the data so that it can go through, the sub process, okay, and kind of get to the end point. So really powerful, really cool, very simple to use kind of stuff. And there's a whole bunch of other plugins too. But the ones that I'm showing you are the ones that you will use almost all the time. There's a couple other Migrate Plus plugins that are pretty useful, like Entity Generate and Entity Lookup. If you already have stuff on, your Drupal side that you need to look up and map, it used to be the common way to do like file to media if you're doing it internally and things like that. But just go on those web pages and kind of look through them all. There's like array ones and ones that you can use like typical PHP functions like string replace and other fun stuff like that. There's a whole bunch. Just go check them out, and every once in a blue moon you'll have a use case where you have to use one of them. But generally, like I said, the ones that I've showed you are pretty straightforward and easy to use. All right, that was a lot of words. Are there any questions?
Yeah, actually, we got quite a few in this last block, and I think a lot of them are related to a similar topic, which is around various versions of migrating media to files. I know that's one that we got last webinar too. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I figured you were going to cover that directly. So for all the folks who were curious about that, we will be covering that coming up. Ali also asked about Scald specifically, which was an alternative to media that was in Drupal 7. So I'm going to assume that it's going to be a very similar process to what John is showing. Mm-hmm. But essentially, earlier, John, you showed a custom source plugin, correct? So I think he'd want to use what you showed towards the beginning of this stream to create a custom source.
What was it called?
Scald is the name of the plugin in Drupal 7. It's essentially an alternative to media where you created custom entities it was very similar in concept to how media works.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I go over the file to media one, I'm sure there's a way to probably do the same things and stuff. But we'll go over that in a minute.
Yeah, let me see what else we've got here as far as questions. Frederick Mitchell asked, what's the best practice to know when something you need to do should be in a source, destination, or process plugin? Is it just a matter of what data is available at a given step?
Exactly, yeah. Okay. I mean, generally what you want to do, at least the workflow I do, is I always try to do everything in the process plugin. You try to get the data over and use your process plugins to massage that data. But then there's times where the data, the structure, it's It's just not easy enough to put it through the process plugin. So then you'll use your prepare row, massage it so that it can fit into this type of workflow easily. And there's usually just one off, like he's like move this array around, or and the alternative is to like run a bunch of chains of like process plugins, and that can be wonky, especially if it's like two nodes or something where their data's off, or something like that. But generally, always start with your process plugins. Try to get that data over as is. When it doesn't work, look at massaging the data within the prepared row on your source plugin.
Got it. Yeah. And we also had a couple questions regarding debugging. So the best way to debug a sub process, are you thinking Xdebug, John? Like
Yeah,
in a,
always use Xdebug. If you watch the first webinar, I kind of show everything on how to set that up. But you can, there's a quick and dirty way of just coming in and we go back and you can just come over here and just do like a var dump, on the new row, and then which I've done, and then do the killer exit, and kill the process and see, that's the quick and dirty way. But for me, Xdebug, once you get it working, it's just so powerful. It's just easier to look through the whole data structure as it is, because that will just, appear in your CLI with a whole bunch of array mess, and sometimes it's harder to read. But that's the quick and dirty way. But I always recommend using Xdebug.
got it. So yeah, and the other question that was sort of related to that is if you're doing stuff in YAML files, like, does that make it more difficult for debugging? Like if you're running into a problem, is that when you need to step into some PHP so that you can debug it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure the question. Are they saying if your YAML files are incorrect, or if the process is correct?
Yeah, I think the question was, so if you're using, if you're doing your migration and you haven't written any custom PHP, it's all just YAML files at this point, since you can do so much that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like how would you debug if something was going wrong?
Yeah, that's when, I mean, obviously if something goes wrong, then you would come to the PHP side and
Yeah.
start throwing debug points and seeing why. If you watch the first video too, I show a quick way to like see like when you get an error message through the drush message command, and then
Right.
you can kind of look through the code base, see where that message comes from, put a breakpoint right before it, and then you'll be able to like kind of backtrack and look at your values and things like that.
Right. Yep. And then we had one more question from Rick Hood. Migrations maps the migrations map the NIDs and VIDs from D7 to D8 typically. So that would mean you can't add new content to the D8 site, then rerun the migrations. Is there a simple way to turn off the NID and VID matching?
Yep, it's a common use case. All you got to do is just not port it over.
Yep.
Just remove these two keys, and they'll dynamically generate them based on your auto increment. And with that,
Yep.
we usually do that a lot in general throughout this. So.
Yeah, because lots of times it's the case that only some of the content in the site's getting migrated.
Yep.
So we'll have 2 or 3 content types, but they're redoing all the marketing pages for the site. So we're going to have somebody creating new content while we're running migrations.
Yeah,
A
a lot of times too is if you want to keep them, what we'll do is we'll set the auto increment on the node table to like 10,000 higher than it was. So when they're creating new, because the node ID doesn't matter unless you're like OCD and everything has to be sequential. But you can do something like that as well, and we've done that before, so that they can continue creating content and you can keep running migrations as is.
Yeah, and another thing you might run into is if anybody referenced node IDs in content.
Yeah, that's the other caveat, like that you run into when you don't do that. And again, maybe that's something I can cover in another webinar, to how you find stuff based on the source database and how to find it in the new one, and things like that. But
yep.
Yeah.
Okay, that clears all our questions. There was a lot of good ones in that round. But go ahead, John.
All right. Oops, did I stop sharing? I did stop sharing.
Yep. We just get your lovely face for now. There we go.
All right. No. Wrong one. All right. So, like I mentioned, you can debug them. You can, you can try all the different ones, but sometimes it comes down to you need a special use case or some funky trill where you have to write your own or extend one or rewrite one to kind of fit your needs. And I'll show you an example of that next too. But always double check, make sure that the process plugin doesn't exist, because I've done this before, especially a couple of years ago. They're like, I need to do this one where it like pops an array off and does all this, and then I went and looked and it already existed. So always double check. Use Google Foo and search Drupal.org because there could be a contrib module that has it or something like that. It's pretty easy to do this. All you're doing is you're extending the process plugin base. The boilerplate and this code has an example of how to do it. And then just like anything else, you change your annotation to match what you're doing. And always remember after you add the new ID to re-import everything. And like I mentioned, you can also just copy pasta an existing plugin, add your flavor to it if need be, and that does happen every once in a while. All right, so after the last webinar, and based on a lot of the clients that come out to us, the commonly scenarios that I'm going to go over real quick is migrating any fields to paragraphs, migrating files to media, and migrating multiple fields to a single, or multiple fields and paragraphs to a single paragraph. And I'll go over that in a minute. So the first one I'll go over real quick is doing a typical paragraph, like a body field and an image to a paragraph in Drupal 8. And this happens all the time. For this use case, I created an image and text one where it's just two files, really simple, straightforward. So how you do this is you'll set up a separate migration for the paragraph itself first. And let's get rid of all this other funky trill. All right. So I'm up here, and now when you're naming your own configs too, especially when you are using Migrate Plus, you have to follow this naming convention: Migrate Plus dot migration dot the name of your stuff. Otherwise, it won't register it, and you'll be banging your head against the wall. All right, so it looks very similar to any other thing. We're grabbing our fields from our D7 node, and what we're doing is processing all our stuff. Right now, we're just moving over the field image and the text field. And then our destination plugin is the paragraph, the entity reference revision, and the default bundle. And that's it. So the only really difference between this and the D7 node is this part here. All right, and then from there, what you do is you will come over here and come all the way down here. So on a one-to-one migration, I always recommend doing it this way because sub-process can get kind of funky when you're just using a string like the ID. So go ahead and set this up so that you're using the migration lookup plugin. We have our plugin name, which we got from right here, our paragraph image text. Throw that in there. We don't want it to create like empty based paragraphs. And then our source is the current node ID. The TNID is a translation NID. You can just use NID if you want. It's honestly the same unless you have a multilingual site. And then from here, we're extracting it because the value will come out as value with an array key of 0. We're grabbing that first index. Say if it was like array like 0.value, you can do this and grab it. But in this use case, this is where the extract plugin comes in handy. So that's it. We've mapped up our fields through secondary entity reference revision YAML, and then we through the field itself that it's the target, and we use the migration lookup plugin. So when we come here and look, we come over here, and I need to reset this. Set that one because I was doing stuff. We'll go ahead and do the command right. Go ahead and run that. Now the paragraphs are created in the database, and then we'll go ahead and rerun our node type one, or node itself. And if I go to the database, again, this is just all nonsense, lorem ipsum content, but come over here, click on edit on the node, come down, and here's our image and text paragraph, and there it is. There's our image, and then the text itself. Right? Pretty straightforward, really simple. This has been written on a bunch of times. Check our blog. You know, this exact same use case has been up there for 2 years. Really simple and easy to do. All right, so on to the one that everybody wants me to talk about, which is the image to media. Now, there's been a lot of ways to do this in the past couple of years. Once media became a thing in Drupal 8, I wrote a blog post about it about 1.5 years ago, and I'll throw it in the webinar follow-up blog post. But it's a very programmatic way to do it, and you had to write your own event subscriber, do a rollback, and yada yada yada. And so I found a way to basically almost do it all through just a YAML file, which is pretty fancy. So I had to create a special source for this, and we'll go over that real quick, called, I didn't know what to call it. I called it file type decide. Naming things is the hardest thing in anything. But what this does is it extends the file source plugin and allows us to search by meme type, type. In this case, we're just searching. You can throw it as a single view or an array of values like image or whatever as it exists on the Drupal 7 site. So that way we're only grabbing that specific type of media. And you'll have to look at your Drupal 7 source to do it. And I usually use the first part, like image / JPEG, image / PNG, whatever. You just use the image part. And if it was a document, you know, text / PDF, or you would just use the text part. From there, that kind of sets this all up. So with this is very similar to the D7 file migration. So since we're extending it, all this is kind of the same. Your source base path, you know, that good stuff, and we're using the public scheme. So how we're doing this is this: we're grabbing our full path of our file, which is the D7 image file. We're taking the path, we're combining it with the file path, which is defined in the file migration. We are URL encoding that, so we're able to grab that actual file during the file copy. Now what we're doing is we're setting up some pseudo fields. Now pseudo fields, I didn't go over them and I should have, but pseudo fields are fields that you can define in your YAML that actually don't exist on the Drupal 8 site, and you can reuse them like this with quotes and an @ symbol. So they're good for creating temp fields and other things like that. And in this case, what we're doing is we're creating 2 different fields, and we're going to concat them together with the concat plugin. This callable plugin is the one that's used very rarely as well, but you're allowed to call PHP functions, like you could call, you know, string to lower or anything like that, but this is calling the base name function, so that we're getting the base name file, and then we're just taking that file name and we're slapping it onto the public schema, and there we go. There's our destination path. So from there, we're mapping the FID to the media ID. We're setting our bundle as with the default plugin as image, the name, all the other good stuff, title, blah, 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 blah. But where the magic happens is here in the target ID. So we're going to skip on this process if it's empty, but we're going to copy the file, which is, it comes from the source file plugin and the destination. And if you actually look at this file copy, this is the source, this is the destination, obviously, as it indicates here, but that's how the plugin is set up. So you have to set the source and the destination in it, so it can take it from your D7 site and then throw it into your D8 site. And then we're using the entity generate plugin, which is what the media will actually get generated as on the Drupal 8 side. And then from there, we're just mapping the values with the FID of the field that it comes from, and, you know, the user ID. And the rest of these are pretty straightforward stuff. And then we're you know, putting it onto the media entity. But since we define bundle up here, we don't have to define the bundle over here. And you need to either identify the bundle in the entity generate or in up here, because you need the bundle for that to work. So that was a lot of words, but if we come up here, you'll notice here our image to media only has 24, because in the old site I actually only had 24 image files and 1 text file. So this is correct that it's actually finding 24 image files because of that special source plugin I used. You could use the file plugin, source plugin as is, but it's going to take stuff that isn't images and migrate it over, like, and that's just wrong. And so that's it. So we'll go ahead and we'll run this. Oh, is it already run? It was already run. Never mind. So we come here and we look at our media tab. All the media is here. So everything came over as expected. And then from here, it's really straightforward. It's just like doing a file one, where we come over and media. So all we really need to do is just use the source FID file, which in our case is the file one, and we're mapping the target ID in the media to the FID, and that's all you need to do. So you have a separate process that's very similar to the file copy, and again, this will be up there on the migration webinar, and I'm going to write a blog post about it too, because I have the older one, and I should write this newer stuff for this, and that's it. And what this does is, if you don't want to have any file-based entities on the Drupal 8 site, this will legit not copy them as a file. They'll copy them as a media entity into your nodes, and it's pretty cool. So that's that. And then finally, the last one I'm going to go real quick with, which is an interesting use case that this is where I created my own process plugin, and this is the multiple migration lookup. The problem with the migration lookup plugin is it only can look up one thing, and then it stops and exits. So if you have to map, like, if you have multiple paragraphs, or like that you've created that, and you have a multi-paragraph widget, you can't use the migration lookup because it doesn't work. There's on the slide a link to an issue queue that's like 3 years old now, where they've almost got it to where it works. It's kind of interesting to try to get it to work, because you have to use multiple patches and things like that, and nobody's got time for that. So I went through and I extended the original. Actually, I rewrote some of it, the migration lookup one, and created it so that it's pretty easy and straightforward to use. Nope, sorry, wrong one. So this is the multiple migration plugin that I wrote. And the one thing when you're doing migrations, we'll come over here, everything gets mapped to the migration map table based on your migration ID name. So when I created this, I saw that everything was mapped one-to-one based on the source ID, which is always the ID of your node or whatever, and then it tells you what your destination ID is. So sometimes I even use this just for one-to-one paragraph migration because it's cleaner and easier to do. So you can, like in this YAML here, you can take this and I created 2 different paragraphs for this, and I'm migrating them both into this multi-widget paragraph based on the NID. And I don't think I actually ran it, but just for the sake of it, I'm going to rerun all my stuff. Just to be safe, always run the paragraphs before your nodes, and then this way we can kind of see. I'm just going to rerun it to make sure everything's there. Back, roll it back in. Now that they added this progress bar, it's a lot nicer too. That happened like 6 months ago.
Progress bars are the best thing to happen to CLI tools.
Yeah. So we'll come over here and we'll go and look at this node again, and we're at the bottom. But here is my multiple paragraph with our image and text, like above. Voila. I managed to do what Drupal core has been writing a patch about for 800 times in like 20 lines of code. So that's it. That was a really quick going over common ETL type situations, but I'm sure there's questions. So
yeah, we actually don't have any fresh new questions at this point in the webinar. Oh, never mind. One just came in. So Michael just asked us, he's curious how long until we post this video. So it'll depend on how fast I edit it. Last webinar we got up, I think,
Monday,
Did it on a
Tuesday.
Friday. We got it up on the Tuesday following.
Yeah.
So it'll probably be something similar to that. I've just got to trim off all the banter at the beginning and make sure, to add watermarks or whatever to make everything look as good as possible.
And then,
Uh,
and then I usually write a accompanying blog post giving a quick synopsis over everything I talked about with links to the various articles and things like that. But
Oh, and Rick Hood says he's getting an error when migrating nodes that have a geo field. The default plugin does not exist. Valid plugin IDs are the back geofield backend default. Does that sound familiar to you at all, John?
I don't know. I'd have to look. I know geofields are weird.
Mm-hmm.
You probably just have to. I'd have to look. I don't know offhand. I can go over it in another webinar.
Yeah, it sounds like an interesting problem though, Rick. But yeah, it sounds like there's some sort of specific default you need for that.
Yeah.
That's
So,
interesting.
so the next webinar, and we're going to do it on May 29th, 3 weeks from now. I was going to do advanced migration topics like event subscribers, any other like use cases, or we can do any Lando based stuff as well, since this is, all Lando based stuff. So if you want to, if people have suggestions real quick, I'll take them under consideration. But if not, I'll do something more like event subscribers are really cool and they're going to kind of be the way of migrations as Drupal 9 progresses. You should be using event subscribers all the time anyways in your code. But it's a really cool thing to do a lot of like post processing and kind of intercepting the migration process as it goes and doing like more data transformations and things like that. And I could look into this geo field one and go over that one as well. If anybody wants anything else, now is your time to speak.
Yeah, Ali asked about grouping and ordering migrations. I know that's something that you've kind of at least touched on briefly in the past, in the first webinar. So there's a little bit of info there.
Yeah, I could do something on that too.
Yeah.
Usually I use a bash file, but I always put everything in groups, but there's like the migrate manifest module that people use. There's a couple different ways. I can go over it in the next webinar.
Okay. All right. Well, so we're a couple minutes over. Thank you to everyone who participated today. Thank you for the questions and for your comments and everything. We appreciate you guys coming to see the webinars. And again, we will be we're recording this as a video and we'll be uploading this to Lando's YouTube channel. So if you're not already following the Lando YouTube channel, go subscribe to the channel there. And then even if you miss any of these migrations, webinars or any of that stuff, you'll just see the videos as we're posting them. So that's a good place to go. Also, make sure to follow Tandem on Twitter. The tag is at Think Tandem, I believe, with Think and Tandem both capitalized.
Yeah.
I'm at Dustin LeBlanc. John, I don't know. Do you have your Twitter handle anywhere, Andy?
It's labboy0276. It's on the beginning.
Okay. Yep. So make sure to follow us on all the socials and stuff. That way you'll have a better chance of seeing the next time we post any of these up. But again, we thank you for your participation and thank you, John, for sharing your knowledge with everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.